Hello, and welcome to the second and final part in a short series on Irish whiskey, the old guard versus the new guard. The problem with this was that there wasn't actually a lot of representation from the new guard yet. That's going to change in the next couple of years. In the previous video, I did the entry-level range for Cooley, which was kind of, some of it was okay, some of it was not that great. But the idea was to pair that up with a whiskey from. So I went perusing my shelves in my local liquor store for either a malt whiskey, or an Irish pot still whiskey, so also barley based, from another distillery, from a recent distillery, that I could pair up to, set up against the Cooley set. And I had some difficulty doing this. The only one I actually found that was labeled as, distilled, aged, and bottled by one of the new distilleries was this option from Dingle. There was also a batch 4, which was more expensive for some reason, and which had port casks. So I tend not to like port casks for maturation, for maturing whiskey. So I went with this one instead, the fifth small batch number 5. What this is Dingle Distillery, single malt, triple distilled Irish whiskey. So this has been matured in a marriage of bourbon, Peter Jimenez, and Madeira casks, non-chill filtered. And this is bottle number 29497. Now, Dingle Distillery is in the far southwest of Ireland. So it's basically the far southwest of Europe. Like, you go any further west of here and you're basically in the ocean, which is kind of cool. So triple distilled, so very traditionally Irish. Owned originally by the Porterhouse Brewery, brewing group, I guess I should say, because they also have a bunch of restaurants. Set up, I guess, in 2012, and they've been sort of distilling ever since. Now, it is not marked. This is a non-age statement whiskey, technically, but according to the current managers, all of this is 6 years old. The marriage of different casks, all the casks are 6 years old. Why wouldn't they put that on the bottle? I mean, I wish they would put it on the bottle. I sort of understand that they're a little bit worried about putting something marked as a 6-year-old whiskey next to sourced whiskeys that are marked as 10, 12 years old. But I get their worry about they're just looking like a lesser product in the midst of all that sourced stuff. Anyways, but let us see what they got here. This was not inexpensive. You are definitely paying the new independent distillery tax with this, but it is bottled, non-chill filtered at a strength of 46.5% alcohol, which ain't too bad. So there is a lot of promise on this. Let's see if it delivers. Okay. On the nose. I mean, okay, first of all, delightful nose. So you look at that list of casks. So bourbon, okay, bourbon, but also Peter Jimenez and Madeira, particularly Peter Jimenez. Peter Jimenez, go buy yourself a bottle of Peter Jimenez if you've never tried it. It is basically a small bottle. Get yourself a half bottle. Do not get like the full 750 of Lustau, whatever. You will not be able to finish it. Half bottle of Peter Jimenez. It is basically liquid raisins. It is the sweetest wine I have ever tried in my life. It is very hard to drink more than a little bit of it at a time because it is so aggressively sweet. Amazing dessert wine, but man, you just gotta be prepared for the bum rush of sugar, and the sugariness, the sweetness can tend to swamp a spirit. So you can be very justifiably worried anytime you see Peter Jimenez on the cask list or in the finish list, especially, that it's just gonna flood the thing. You're just gonna be drinking raisins basically. But in this case, that's not what I'm getting on the nose. I mean, there is a little subtle touch of dried fruit on this, a little golden raisin thing going on, but what I'm mainly getting is just the maltiness of this. I'm getting the sense that what's happened is this is not what kind of annoys me about Irish whiskey, the fact that the distillate is just being used as a vehicle for the cask influence. This is the other way around. This is the casks supporting and uplifting, this incredibly barley-rich distillate. I'm getting, tons of like barley sweetness, that the inside of a molten milk ball. So like cut away the chocolate, cut away the outside, just the inside of your malted milk ball. But then also ginger all day long, candied ginger, gingerbread, ginger snaps. And as a huge ginger snap fan, like that was my jam when I was a kid. I wanted ginger snaps. All the other kids wanted chocolate chip. I wanted my ginger snaps. So this makes me very happy to see it on the nose. Clover honey, like citrus honey, lemon honey, orange blossom honey, dried apricot. Very prominent actually. But it's like a peppery dried. It's like you take a dried apricot and you cover it in white pepper. Vanilla bean. That's the bourbon cask, I guess. Some Darjeeling tea, like stewed Darjeeling. And lots of just malty, apple-y pear kind of stuff. Like, apple pear pie, that kind of thing. And kind of a wet leaf kind of note, like, dried leaves in a puddle after a storm, that kind of thing. A little bit of fennel, little hint of like earthy, kind of licoricey stuff, and definitely a lot of allspice actually. Huge allspice dose on this, kind of running right alongside the gingerbready kind of note. Little dried flowers, some dried grass. I'm splashing this all over myself because I'm so excited. The little hints of dried fruit, a little fig, the golden raisins, but very, very restrained. I wonder if maybe they weren't using fresh PX casks with this. Maybe they were like second fill PX casks. I don't know. I wouldn't want to second guess them, but it's very subtle on this. There is dried fruit, but there's not. It's not. Leading the dance on this. Like one fig, like one old book, like a leathery, dusty old tome. But it's very restrained again. There's a Swisher Sweets note on this. The little cheap cigars that have that sort of sweet character to them, which I kind of like, even though I feel like maybe I should disapprove. Anyone else out there like Swisher Sweets? Am I the only one? But mingled in with that, like you made a Swisher Sweet with some Oriental tobacco, with that very citric kind of tobacco. It's terrific nose. You can tell it's young. This doesn't have the sort of tertiary characteristics, those kind of deep tier flavor profiles that I expect from something that's sort of starting to push to its teens. But what's there is really quite excellent, at least on the nose. On the palate, again, just delightful is the word. and a terrific expression of Irish whiskey. The delicacy is there. The nuance is there. The only thing it's missing is about, 5 to 10 more years in cask. But, this is hitting the sweet spot for me. Oh, that's good. Honey. All the honeys. Like, just pick a honey. It is in this. There's that Swisher Sweet note again. The cream of wheat. Actually, there wasn't really a cream of wheat note on the nose, but it's there on the palate. Kind of nice cream of wheat, which you mixed like lots of honey into. Just laundry lists of honey. Clump of dried grass, dried flowers. A little bit of dried fruits. A fig here and there. Some raisins, some golden raisins. But then you're getting sort of a malty heaven kind of thing. Lots of apple, lots of pear. Kind of dessert apple, pear pie, apple pie. Tea, Darjeeling again, white pepper. There's a little bit of a bitter note on the finish. I mean, it's a nice drying finish. Some nice wood tannins. The sort of Darjeeling tea thing kind of drying out my mouth, which is nice. But there's something more than that. There's a kind of like a burned grass thing going on, which I've encountered in Irish whiskey before. And when you first encounter it, you think maybe that's like a flaw. Maybe that's not supposed to be happening. But you kind of get used to it. It's actually quite pleasant. It's not like a unpleasant bitterness. It's just a different kind of bitterness. This kind of not even herbaceous bitterness, but just kind of like burned grass or burned flowers on the back end. Refreshing is the word. It's kind of like what is that? So I kind of feel like I'm chewing, like I just chewed on a coffee bean. Like, not that I'm currently chewing on it, but I swallowed, and I have like some coffee bean aftertaste in my mouth. That's kind of what I'm getting. Some lemongrass. The kind of old book note I was getting on the nose, the old paper and the old leather. Allspice again, but much more restrained than on the nose. What is that? There's kind of tartness to this, like a red fruity tartness that reminds me of rhubarb, but it's not rhubarb. It's almost. It reminds me of Perique actually. My all-time favorite tobacco. So if rhubarb and Perique had a love child, like it is in this glass, and I'm really digging it. And lots of gingerbread too. Not as much as on the nose. It's a little more restrained, but there's some like spicy, bready ginger notes. That's lovely. I'm gonna give this a squirt and a quarter of water. Yeah, that's good. So you may be watching this and thinking to and like screaming at the screen, Scott, what are you talking about? There's tons and tons and tons of whiskeys on the shelf, and malts and Irish pot still whiskeys on the shelf at that, not made by Cooley or Bushmills or Middleton. Why Dingle of all things? Here's the thing. I checked the fine print on these damn things. I complained before about the Whistler, right? By Bourne Distillery. This is in a way the most honest of this bunch. They say explicitly crafted by a Bourne Distillery instead of distilled. So at least like that's the best statement that we ain't actually made this stuff. We just put it in a sherry cask after the fact. But there's others out there on your shelf that look to all the world like they distilled it. I think I called these in my Whistler review. I'm going to link that down below. Crypto independent bottlings or crypto sourced bottlings. These things that are presenting as if they distilled it themselves, but they really haven't. That's a problem. This is a huge problem in Irish whiskey, and I hope it's going to kind of, things are going to quietly move away from this. But if it keeps going, like, there's going to be problems as the press starts to kind of emphasize, hey, these are all from the same distilleries. It ain't good. So you may, one of the things I was looking at instead of Dingle, because it was a cheaper option, if I'm totally honest, was West Cork, right? I already still read or reviewed West Cork's barrel proof, right? West Cork has been around for actually longer than Dingle has. So, I thought I would grab West Cork's single malt. They have an 8-year-old. It looked promising, and it wasn't very expensive. The thing is, if you actually read the fine print on the back of West Cork's bottlings, you will see different things. They have a couple of the stout finished bottling actually says distilled, aged, and bottled by West Cork Distillery. But their 8-year-old single malt just says produced, as does this, which I reviewed before, the barrel proof. This says, I'm not sure if you can see that, produced by West Coast Distillers Limited. So it ain't theirs, actually. It ain't theirs. I reviewed it as if it was theirs, as if they were making it themselves, but no. Even the poitín. I don't know if anyone has dug this deep into the archives of the channel, but this Glendalough poitín, of course it's got to be theirs, right? Because who would be insane enough to bottle someone else's new make? They've got to have started a distillery and started distilling it themselves, and they've got to be using this bottling to make money for their other stuff, right? No. Product of Ireland, not product of Glendalough Distillery. Spirits distilled from grains. Nowhere on this bottle do you see distilled by Glendalough Distillery, and not aged, but at least bottled there. They're getting this from somewhere else. This is the problem at the moment with Irish whiskey. This is the only bottle, aside from the batch 4, which port casks, the only bottle on my Irish whiskey shelf that was a malt or a Irish pot still that was not made at Cooley or Middleton or Bushmills. This is it. This is the only other option. So this is the one I'm reviewing. However, delightfully, it's actually really good. So, support them and support the others as they slowly trickle out and start selling their own stuff. Why is it like this? All right, let's go back to our Dingle. Batch 5. All right, now with a couple squirts of water in it. On the nose. Okay, a little more white pepper, a little more pepperiness coming through. A little more of that sort of oriental tobacco kind of note, that sort of citric tobacco. And more honey and more gingerbread. The malty notes are not really stepping up. It's more the tobacco and the pepper and the kind of honey gingerbread thing that's coming forward. And a little orange peel, too. That wasn't out there when I was sampling it neat. It's not a huge amount of change, but it's a young whiskey. You shouldn't expect a huge amount of change when you add water. Actually, if I'm totally honest, most of the time you add water, the changes are not humongous. They're pretty modest. but it's still worth doing because it's a pressure test on your distillate, right? And that's what you want to do when you're reviewing stuff. So, so I do it. Anyways, on the palate, ooh, so the mouthfeel on this was already pretty good before water. It gets much creamier, much more mouthfilling when you add water. With a longer finish. The finish is longer, more peppery, more honeyed, which I'm enjoying very much. There's a very nice sort of sweet thing allied to a very drying thing that's very appealing. This is what the folks want. Not a huge amount of change, but the changes that are there are providing a lot of hints as to the quality of this stuff. This is really well made. And it's got a profile I feel like a lot of people will get into. Still young, you can tell. Again, it doesn't have those additional layers of character that you would expect from an older whiskey. But it's great. Well, not good, but really good. And it fits into a category which I have a soft spot for, which I'm going to call opening whiskeys. So I used to run whiskey tastings back in the before times. And one of the things I was looking for is something to slot into that first tasting, that first whiskey of the night. So you have something on the table that people can drink all night long that's kind of cheap, like they can just, play with to kind of cleanse their palate. But for the first whiskey, you want something a little bit beyond that. You want something that isn't, it's not gonna ruin their palate, right? That's the absolute opposite of what you want. What you want is something that's going to prepare their palate. It's going to get them kind of salivating, going to get their taste buds all firing right in the right ways. You don't want something that's like too good, too complex and overwhelming right out of the gate, but it's got to be pretty good, right? It's got to be right in that sweet spot between too complex, but also you don't want it being too simple. This is your warm-up whiskey. And this is, so I've mentioned this before in the context of like I think a Glen Grant 15 that I reviewed, and maybe a couple of other things. This absolutely slots into that role perfectly. If you were looking for a whiskey to just open a night when you've got some really great stuff coming up and you just need to have your palate set up, this is a great little option right here. I like this a lot. Yeah, so, I mean, point-wise, I'm going to give this an 85 out of 100. I mean, it's not terrific value for the price they're asking for it, but I mean, it does play well in that sort of first whiskey kind of role, which is less common than you would think it would be, right? And it's just a beautiful example of an Irish whiskey that just hasn't been buried in wood. Even though from what they're telling you on the front, all this stuff about Madeira and so on, you would think it's been buried in wood. It isn't. You're getting the distillate here, and that's terrific. Good stuff, and hopefully the harbinger of good things to come in Ireland. Well done, Dingle. Very well done, in fact. I look forward to future stuff. And to the viewer, thanks for watching. The dislike button is down there again. But thanks for watching. I hope this was educational, and cheers.